The stars had always been quiet. For thousands of years, humanity looked up at the night sky and wondered if anyone else was out there. They built telescopes and sent radio signals into the void. They dreamed of meeting other beings who shared the same universe. When the answer finally came, it changed everything. The year was 2247. Humanity had spread across dozens of star systems. They had colonies on distant worlds and space stations floating in the darkness between planets. Earth remained the heart of human civilization, but it was no longer alone. The United Earth Coalition governed all human territories with fairness and hope for the future. First contact happened near the edge of human space. A massive ship appeared from nowhere. It was unlike anything humans had ever built. The ship was smooth and silver, shaped like a curved blade. It hung in space for 3 days before sending a message. The message was simple. It said that the Empire wished to speak. They were the first alien species humanity had ever met. They were tall beings with gray skin and 4 arms. Their eyes were completely black, and they never showed emotion on their faces. They came from a distant part of the galaxy and ruled over 40 star systems. They had been watching humanity for a long time. The first meetings were careful. Both sides were curious but also afraid. Humans sent scientists and diplomats to speak with the representatives. The aliens were cold and formal. They explained that the Empire was powerful and ancient. They had crushed many other species who had challenged them. They wanted to establish trade and borders with humanity. Many humans were hopeful. They thought this was the beginning of a new age. Finally, they were not alone in the universe. Others were more careful. They noticed how they spoke about other species. The aliens used words like conquered and submitted very often. They talked about war as if it was normal and expected. The United Earth Coalition decided to send their best diplomat to negotiate a formal treaty. They chose Ambassador. She was 62 years old and had spent her entire life bringing people together. She had ended 3 civil conflicts and helped create lasting peace between rival human factions. She was wise, patient, and believed in the good in all beings. Accepted the mission with pride. She knew it was the most important job anyone had ever given her. The future of humanity might depend on what she accomplished. She studied everything known about the. She learned their language and their customs. She prepared for months before finally boarding the ship that would take her to their space. Her ship was called the Olive Branch. It was a diplomatic vessel with no weapons. This was a deliberate choice. Wanted to show that humans came in peace. The ship carried her staff of 20 people, including translators, advisors, and security officers. They traveled for 2 weeks before reaching the border. An escort met them and guided them to a space station. The station was enormous, bigger than any human structure. It floated near a red giant star that filled the sky with bloody light. Found it beautiful in a strange way. Her staff was nervous, but she kept them calm with her steady presence. The negotiations began slowly. Met with an official named High Commander. He was taller than the other and wore elaborate robes covered in symbols. He spoke in a deep voice that seemed to echo even in small rooms. He never smiled, and he never showed any warmth. Tried to find common ground. She spoke about trade and mutual benefit. She talked about how different species could learn from each other. She described the human desire for peace and cooperation. High Commander listened without expression. When she finished, he simply nodded and said they would continue the next day. The negotiations went on for 3 months, made slow progress. She secured some basic trade agreements and established communication protocols. But every time she tried to discuss deeper cooperation, they pulled back. They seemed to view other species as either useful tools or potential threats. The concept of equals working together confused them. Grew frustrated but never showed it. She remained patient and professional. Her reports to Earth were hopeful but realistic. She explained that they were difficult but not impossible. She believed that time and trust could change things. She asked for more patience from the coalition government. Then something went wrong. It started with a simple misunderstanding. One of his advisors made a comment during a formal dinner. He was trying to compliment the cuisine but used the wrong word. In the language, what he said was actually an insult to their ancestors. The at the table went silent. Their black eyes seemed to grow even darker. Immediately apologized. She explained that it was an accident and that no offense was intended. She bowed her head in the gesture of respect. For a moment, it seemed like the situation might calm down. High Commander raised his hand and spoke quietly to his officers. Then everything changed. Stood up and pointed at. He declared that humans had shown their true nature. He said they were disrespectful and unworthy of negotiation. He announced that the diplomatic mission was over. His soldiers moved forward with weapons drawn. Security officers tried to protect her. They were unarmed, following the rules of the diplomatic mission. They put themselves between her and the soldiers. One of them, a young man named, stepped forward with his hands raised. "Please," he said, "this is a mistake. We can resolve this peacefully." A soldier shot him in the chest. He fell to the ground and did not move again. Everything happened very fast after that. Staff tried to run. The soldiers fired their weapons without mercy. Bodies fell all around her. People she had known for years were killed in seconds. The screams were terrible. The smell of burning flesh filled the air. Did not run. She stood in the center of the chaos and raised her voice. She called out for calm. She begged them to stop. She reminded them of the laws of diplomacy that all civilized species followed. Her voice was steady even as her staff died around her. High Commander walked toward her slowly. His soldiers stopped firing and watched. The room became quiet except for the moans of the wounded. Stopped in front of and looked down at her with his black eyes. "You speak of laws," he said. "They make their own laws. The strong decide what is right and what is wrong. Your species is weak. You come here with no weapons and no army. You think words can protect you. You are wrong." Did not look away from him. "Killing diplomats is an act of war," she said. "Do you understand what that means? Do you understand what humanity will do?" Made a sound that might have been a laugh. "We have watched your species," he said. "We know what you will do. You will mourn. You will protest. You will send strongly worded messages. And then you will accept what has happened because you have no other choice. You are not warriors. You are builders and dreamers. You do not have the stomach for real conflict." He drew a blade from his robes. It was long and curved, made of black metal. Did not step back. She looked at the blade and then looked its face. "You are wrong about us," she said quietly. "You have made a terrible mistake." Drove the blade through her heart. Died standing up, looking her killer in the eyes. She was the greatest diplomat humanity had ever produced, and she died believing that her death would be avenged. They recorded everything. They sent the recording to the United Earth Coalition. They sent copies to every human colony and every human ship. They wanted humanity to see what had happened. They wanted humanity to feel fear. The recording arrived on Earth at 3:47 in the morning. The coalition president, James, was woken by his emergency staff. He watched the recording in silence. He watched try to save her people. He watched her die with dignity and courage. When the recording ended, he sat in darkness for a long time. The news spread across human space within hours. People woke up to find the video on every screen. They watched in horror as they murdered their diplomat and her entire staff. 21 people had died. 21 people who had gone to space with hope in their hearts. The reaction was unlike anything that had happened before. In cities across Earth, people filled the streets. They did not protest peacefully. They demanded action. They demanded justice. They demanded blood. The anger was so intense that it seemed to have its own gravity. It pulled everyone together into a single feeling of rage. The coalition assembly met in emergency session. Representatives from every human territory gathered to discuss the response. Some called for calm. They said that war would be terrible and costly. They reminded everyone that they were powerful and ancient. They warned that humanity might not survive a full conflict. Others shouted them down. They played the recording of death again and again. They pointed to her final words. They argued that failing to respond would invite more attacks. They said that humanity's honor and safety were at stake. President let them argue for hours. He listened to every voice and considered every argument. When the chamber finally grew quiet, he stood and walked to the podium. The room was silent as he began to speak. "I have watched the recording of Ambassador's death more times than I can count," he said. "Each time I notice something new, the courage in her voice, the steadiness in her eyes, the way she refused to look away from her killer. She knew what was coming and she faced it with dignity." He paused and looked around the room. "They think they know us. They think we are soft and weak. They think we will mourn and then move on. They believe that because we value peace, we are incapable of war. They are wrong." His voice grew stronger. "For thousands of years, humans have fought each other. We have waged terrible wars over land and resources and ideas. We have committed great evils in our history, but we have also shown great courage and sacrifice. When pushed, humanity does not bend. When our people are murdered, we do not forget." The chamber was completely silent. "They have made their choice. They have chosen to be our enemies. They have killed our diplomat and dared us to respond. I say we accept their dare. I say we show them what humanity becomes when we are united and angry. I say we go to war." The vote was unanimous. For the first time in human history, every single representative agreed on something. The United Earth Coalition declared war on the Empire. The announcement was broadcast across human space. The response was immediate. Military recruitment centers were overwhelmed. Young men and women lined up by the millions. They wanted to serve. They wanted to fight. They wanted revenge. The military had to turn people away because there were too many volunteers. Factories that made civilian goods switched to military production. Ships designed for exploration were retrofitted with weapons. Mining colonies increased their output to provide raw materials for war. The entire human economy shifted in weeks. Everyone contributed. Everyone worked. Scientists who had spent their careers on peaceful research turned their minds to weapons. They developed new technologies with frightening speed. Energy weapons that could cut through armor. Shields that could withstand their attacks. Faster engines that could outmaneuver their ships. Humanity had always been good at innovation. Now they innovated for destruction. They watched these preparations with confusion. They had expected humanity to collapse into despair and division. Instead, humanity was coming together with terrible purpose. High Commander received reports about the human mobilization and dismissed them. He believed that humans were putting on a show. He did not think they would actually fight. He was wrong. 6 months after his death, the United Earth Coalition launched its first attack. A fleet of 300 ships crossed into territory. They moved in perfect formation, like a single living creature. At the head of the fleet was a new warship called the Vengeance. It was the largest and most powerful ship humanity had ever built. The fleet struck an outpost without warning. The battle lasted less than 2 hours. Human ships attacked with ferocity that shocked the defenders. They expected humans to fight cautiously and carefully. Instead, humans attacked like they had nothing to lose. They accepted heavy casualties without hesitation. The outpost fell. Every soldier was killed. Human forces did not take prisoners. When the battle was over, they broadcast a message to the Empire. The message was simple. "You killed our diplomat, now we kill you." This was the beginning. The war that followed would last for years. It would be bloody and terrible and costly. But humanity never stopped. They never wavered. They never forgot the woman who had died standing up, looking her killer in the eyes. Ambassador had believed in peace. She had spent her life bringing people together, but her death had united humanity in a different way. Her death had given birth to a war machine that the galaxy had never seen before. They had made a terrible mistake. They had awakened something that should have stayed asleep. They had turned humanity from dreamers into destroyers, and they would pay for that mistake with everything they had. The stars were no longer quiet. They burned with the fire of human rage, and that fire would not stop until the Empire was nothing but ash and memory. The war had been raging for 2 years. What started with a single attack on an outpost had grown into the largest conflict the galaxy had ever seen. Human fleets moved through space like hungry wolves. They burned everything they touched. They showed no mercy because none had been shown to them. Admiral Sarah stood on the bridge of this vengeance and watched the battlefield through the main. Ahead of her, a defense station was breaking apart. Explosions rippled across its surface as human missiles found their targets. Escape pods launched from the dying structure, but human fighters shot them down before they could escape. Sarah felt nothing as she watched. 2 years ago, she might have felt pity. 2 years ago, she might have ordered her ships to stand down and allow the escape pods to flee. But that was before she had seen what they did to human prisoners. That was before she had lost her husband on the colony world of New Shanghai. They had bombarded New Shanghai from orbit. They had killed 3 million people in less than an hour. David had been among them. He had been a school teacher who wrote poetry in his spare time. He had never held a weapon in his life. Now he was ash, scattered across a dead world. Sarah watched the last escape pod explode and felt a cold satisfaction. Every death brought her closer to something she could not name. It was not peace. Peace would never come for her. But there was a terrible comfort in knowing that they were suffering too. Station destroyed, her tactical officer reported. No survivors detected. Good, Sarah said. Signal the fleet. We move to the next target in 1 hour. I want all ships refueled and rearmed. They had expected human anger to fade over time. They thought that the passion of revenge would cool as the war dragged on. They believed that humans would grow tired of death and begin looking for peace. Once again, they were wrong. Human fury only grew stronger with each passing month. Every victory created more martyrs. Every human death added fuel to the fire. The war had become something beyond strategy and territory. It had become personal for every human in the galaxy. They did not understand this. Their society was built on cold logic and strict hierarchy. They fought wars for resources and power. When a war became too costly, they would negotiate and withdraw. They could not comprehend an enemy who fought without counting the cost. High Commander sat in his command chamber and reviewed the latest reports. The news was bad. Human forces had captured 12 star systems in the past 3 months. The fleet had suffered losses that would take decades to replace. Industrial worlds that had fed the Empire for centuries were now burning ruins. How is this possible? Asked his advisors. The humans were supposed to be weak. They were builders and merchants. How have they become this? His chief strategist, a thin named, brought up a holographic display. It showed the human military structure and their known fleet positions. The numbers were troubling. The humans have converted their entire civilization to war production, explained. Every factory now makes weapons. Every shipyard builds warships. Their population has embraced military service as a religious duty. We estimated it would take them 10 years to build a force capable of challenging us. They did it in 2. Stared at the display. They are burning through their resources at an unsustainable rate. They cannot maintain this intensity forever. You are correct, agreed. Our projections show they will face severe economic collapse within 5 years, but by then they may have already destroyed our core systems. They do not care about the future. They only care about hurting us. Remembered his conversation with Ambassador before he killed her. She had warned him that he was making a mistake. He had laughed at her. Now her words haunted his thoughts every night. Far from the command chambers, a human soldier named Private James Wu crouched in a trench on the surface of a contested world. The planet was called Prime 7. It was not a major world, but it had factories that produced weapon components. Human command wanted those factories destroyed. James was 19 years old. Before the war, he had planned to study engineering at the University of Mars. He had wanted to design space stations and orbital platforms. He had dreamed of building things that would last for centuries. Now he spent his days killing soldiers and trying not to get killed himself. The battle for Prime 7 had been going on for 3 weeks. Human forces had landed on the surface and established a beachhead. They had responded with everything they had. The fighting was brutal and constant. James had seen friends die in ways he could never forget. "Movement on the left flank," his squad leader called out. "Everyone get ready." James raised his rifle and peered through the scope. He saw gray shapes moving through the smoke and dust. They were launching another attack. They came in waves, always in waves. They did not seem to care how many of them died. The first wave reached the human lines and was cut down by concentrated fire. The second wave followed seconds later. James fired until his rifle overheated and then grabbed another one from a fallen comrade. He did not have time to think. Thinking was dangerous. Thinking made you slow. The battle lasted for 4 hours. When it was over, the ground in front of the human trenches was covered with bodies. James counted them automatically. 312. He had killed at least 20 himself. "We held them," someone said. There was no joy in the voice, just tired acceptance. James looked down at his hands. They were shaking. They always shook after a battle. He had stopped trying to control it. He just waited until the shaking stopped on its own. A medic moved through the trench, checking on the wounded. Some could be saved. Others were given injections that would make their last moments peaceful. The medic's face was blank and professional. He had done this too many times to feel it anymore. James thought about his family back on Mars. His mother sent him letters every week. She told him about daily life and neighborhood gossip in her garden. She never asked about the war. She never asked what he had seen or done. He was grateful for that. His father was different. His father had been a soldier in the old conflicts before humanity was united. He understood what James was going through. His letters were shorter but somehow more meaningful. He never said he was proud or offered empty encouragement. He just reminded James to breathe and stay alive. The fighting on Prime 7 continued for another month. Human forces eventually captured all their objectives. The factories were destroyed and the planet was secured. Out of the 5,000 soldiers in James's division, only 2,000 were still alive when it was over. Command called it a victory. James did not know what to call it. Back in human space, the war effort consumed everything. The old divisions between colonies and factions had disappeared. Everyone was human first. Everyone was fighting the same enemy. It was strange how war could unite people in ways peace never had. President had aged 20 years in the 2 years since the war began. His hair had gone completely white, and deep lines marked his face. He slept only a few hours each night and spent every waking moment managing the conflict. Today he was visiting a military hospital on Earth. He walked through the wards and spoke with wounded soldiers. He shook hands and offered thanks and tried to give comfort. It was the hardest part of his job. One soldier caught his attention. She was young, maybe 25, and she was missing both legs below the knee. Her medical chart said her name was Lieutenant Maria Santos. She had been a fighter pilot until a missile hit her ship. "Mr. President," she said when he approached her bed, "I wasn't expecting visitors." Sat down beside her. "Lieutenant Santos, I've read about your actions at the Battle of Vega Station. You destroyed 4 enemy ships before you were hit. That's remarkable." Maria shrugged. "I was doing my job, sir, like everyone else." How are you feeling? She looked down at where her legs used to be. The doctors say I'll get prosthetics. They say I can learn to walk again, maybe even run. But I won't fly combat ships anymore. The reflexes won't be the same. Nodded, I'm sorry. Don't be, Maria said. I knew the risks when I volunteered. We all did. I'll find another way to serve. Maybe I can train new pilots, pass on what I learned. You've already given more than anyone could ask. Maria's eyes hardened. No, sir, I haven't given nearly enough. Not until every who helped kill Ambassador is dead. Not until their empire is dust. That's when I'll stop giving. Saw the same fire in her eyes that he saw in soldiers everywhere. It was the fire that kept the war going. It was the fire that they had ignited without understanding what it would become. In the Empire, things were growing desperate. The humans had taken 30 star systems. The Imperial fleet had lost half its ships. Factories that once supplied the military were now rubble. Food production had dropped as workers were pulled into the military. Some worlds were beginning to starve. High Commander called a meeting of the Imperial Council. The council chamber was a massive room with a domed ceiling decorated with scenes of conquest. Representatives from every major family and military command gathered to discuss the crisis. We must seek peace, said Elder Moth, the oldest member of the council. The humans have proven they will not stop. If we continue this war, we face extinction. Slammed his fist on the table. Peace. You dare speak of peace. The humans want our destruction, not negotiations. They will not stop until we are all dead. Then perhaps we should offer them what they want, another elder said. Give them those responsible for the diplomatic incident. Give them you, High Commander. Your death might satisfy their vengeance. The room went silent. His black eyes swept across the council members. He saw fear in their faces, but also calculation. They were measuring the cost of keeping him against the cost of giving him up. You would sacrifice me to save yourselves? Asked quietly. You think the humans would accept that and stop their war? It is a possibility, Elder Moth said carefully. The humans seem focused on revenge for their diplomat. Perhaps if we give them the one who killed her. You are fools, interrupted. You understand nothing about our enemy. The humans are not fighting for their diplomat. They are fighting because war has become their purpose. They have transformed their entire civilization into a weapon aimed at us. Killing me would not satisfy them. It would only prove that they can break us. He stood and walked to the center of the chamber. I have studied the humans carefully. They are dangerous precisely because they do not fight like us. We fight for advantage. They fight for meaning. We measure costs and benefits. They measure honor and memory. There is no price we can pay to make them stop. There is no sacrifice that will satisfy them. Then what do you suggest? Elder Moth asked. Turn to face the council. We fight. We fight until we win or until we die. There is no other choice. The humans have given us none. The council argued for hours, but in the end, they agreed to continue the war. They had no other options. The trap they had created by killing Ambassador had closed around them completely. Far away, in a memorial park on Earth, a statue stood in the center of a garden. The statue showed her standing tall with one hand raised in a gesture of peace. At the base of the statue were the words she had spoken to High Commander before her death. You are wrong about us. Every day people came to visit the statue. They brought flowers and letters and small gifts. They stood in silence and remembered the woman who had died for peace and ignited a war. Some prayed for her soul. Others swore oaths of vengeance. All of them felt connected to something larger than themselves. A young girl stood at the base of the statue with her father. She was 8 years old and did not fully understand the war. She knew that bad aliens had killed a good person and that humanity was fighting to punish them. She knew that her uncle had gone away to fight and might not come back. Daddy, she said, why did they kill her? Her father was quiet for a long moment. They thought we were weak, he finally said. They thought they could hurt us without consequences. Were we weak? He shook his head. No, sweetie, we just didn't want to fight. There's a difference. Do you think we'll win the war? He looked at the statue of and then down at his daughter. Her eyes were full of innocent trust. She believed that he knew all the answers. He wished he did. I think we'll never give up, he said, and sometimes that's the same thing. The war continued across the stars. Ships burned and soldiers died and worlds changed hands. Both sides suffered beyond measure. Both sides kept fighting. Neither side could imagine stopping. Admiral Sarah captured her 50th star system and thought about her dead husband. Private James Wu survived his 20th battle and forgot what peace felt like. President sent another 1,000 ships to the front and prayed he was doing the right thing. High Commander reviewed another defeat and wondered if the woman he had killed was laughing in the afterlife. They were all trapped in a cycle of violence that none of them could escape. The war had become bigger than any individual. It had become a force of nature, like gravity or time. It pulled everything into itself and consumed everything it touched. And still humanity kept coming. Wave after wave, ship after ship, soldier after soldier. They came with fury in their hearts and name on their lips. They came because they could not do anything else. They had killed their diplomat and now they would kill the universe had never seen anything like it. The universe was afraid. 4 years had passed since the death of Ambassador. 4 years of war without pause. 4 years of death and destruction on a scale that made previous conflicts seem like children's games. The galaxy had become a graveyard, and still the killing continued. The Empire had lost more than half its territory. What was once a proud civilization spanning 40 star systems now controlled fewer than 18. Human forces surrounded them on every side. The noose was tightening with every passing day. But the cost to humanity was terrible. Millions of soldiers had died on alien worlds. Thousands of ships drifted in space as silent tombs. The economy was stretched to the breaking point. Every family had lost someone. Every colony bore scars from the fighting. In a military hospital on the planet Titan, Private James Wu lay in a bed and stared at the ceiling. He had been wounded in the Battle of 3. A plasma bolt had burned through his left side, destroying his kidney and part of his liver. The doctors had saved his life with synthetic organs, but his fighting days were over. James was 23 years old now. He had spent 4 years at war. He had killed more than he could count. He had watched friends die in his arms and held the line when everyone else was running. He had been promoted to sergeant after his 2nd year and then to lieutenant after his 3rd. None of it mattered anymore. A nurse came to check on him. She was young and pretty and reminded him of a girl he had known on Mars before the war. That girl had probably married someone else by now. Life went on for people who were not fighting. Sometimes James forgot that. "How are you feeling today, Lieutenant?" the nurse asked. "Alive," James said. It was the only answer he had. She checked his readings and made notes on her tablet. "Your recovery is going well. The synthetic organs are integrating properly. You should be able to walk without assistance in another week." "And then what?" She looked at him with eyes that had seen too many wounded soldiers. "Then you go home. You've done your part, Lieutenant, more than your part." Home? James tried to remember what that word meant. He had not been to Mars in 4 years. His parents had sent him pictures of his old room, unchanged and waiting for him. They had sent messages saying how proud they were and how much they missed him. He had not been able to respond properly. What could he say to people who had never seen what he had seen? "I don't know how to do anything except fight," James said quietly. "They trained us to kill. They made us good at it. Now what am I supposed to do with that?" The nurse did not have an answer. She finished her checks and moved to the next bed. James went back to staring at the ceiling. Elsewhere in the galaxy, the war continued without him. Admiral Sarah was preparing for the largest operation of the entire conflict. Human forces were massing for an attack on the capital system. If they could take Prime, the war might finally end. Sarah stood in the planning room of this vengeance and studied the holographic display. The enemy capital was well defended. 300 warships protected the system, along with orbital platforms and ground-based weapons. Breaking through would cost thousands of lives. Her senior officers surrounded her. They were all veterans now, hardened by years of constant fighting. Some of them had been with her since the beginning. Others had replaced those who had fallen. All of them shared the same hollow look in their eyes. "The enemy fleet is concentrated here, around the second planet," Sarah said, pointing to the display. "That's their main industrial world. They expect us to attack there first." "So we don't," said Captain, her tactical officer. "We bypass the second planet and go straight for Prime." "That leaves a hostile fleet at our backs," objected Commander Lisa Park, her executive officer. "They could cut off our retreat." "We're not going to retreat," Sarah said simply. "We go in hard and we don't stop until it's over. Either we win or we die trying. There's no middle ground." The room was silent. They all understood what she was saying. This battle would not have an extraction plan. This battle would end only when one side was destroyed. "Prepare the fleet," Sarah ordered. "We jump in 3 days." On Prime, High Commander stood in the Imperial Palace and looked out at the city below. It was ancient and beautiful, built over thousands of years by generations of his people. Towers of crystal and metal reached toward the sky. Gardens filled with alien plants covered the hills. Millions of lived and worked in the streets below. All of it might be dust soon. Had received intelligence about the human fleet massing at the border. He knew the attack was coming. He knew his forces were outnumbered and the humans had grown stronger with every year of the war, while they had grown weaker. He thought about fleeing. He could take a ship and escape to the outer territories. Some had already done this, abandoning the empire to save themselves. They would live as refugees, scattered across the galaxy, forever running from human vengeance. No, he would not run. He had started this war by killing the human diplomat. He would end it here, one way or another. His aide entered the room and bowed. "High Commander, the Council requests your presence." "Tell them I will come shortly." Took one last look at the city. He tried to memorize every detail. The way the sunlight reflected off the crystal towers, the sound of the wind through the gardens, the smell of the flowering trees in the palace grounds. He wanted to remember it all in case he never saw it again. The council chamber was tense when he arrived. The elders and military commanders sat in their usual places, but their faces showed fear instead of confidence. They had heard the same intelligence reports. They knew what was coming. "The humans are preparing to attack our home system," Elder Moth said. "Our scouts report a fleet of over 500 ships. We cannot match those numbers." "I am aware of the situation," replied calmly. "Then what do you propose to do about it?" Walk to the center of the chamber. He looked at each council member in turn. These were the leaders of his people. Some had served the empire for centuries. Others were young warriors who had risen through the ranks during the war. All of them were afraid. "We have 3 choices," said. "We can surrender and hope the humans show mercy. We can flee and live as exiles, or we can fight and die defending our home." "What about negotiation?" someone asked. "Perhaps we can offer them something they want." "We have nothing they want except our deaths," said. "I have studied the humans carefully. They are not fighting for territory or resources. They are fighting for revenge. They will not stop until they have it." "Then we should surrender," Elder Moth said. "At least some of our people might survive." "You think so?" asked. "You think the humans will spare those who surrendered while others died fighting? You do not understand them. They respect courage and hate weakness. If we surrender, they will despise us. They will treat us like the vermin they already believe us to be." He drew himself up to his full height. "I will not surrender. I will not run. I will fight here on our and I will die if necessary. Those who wish to join me may do so. Those who wish to flee or surrender may go. I will not stop them, but I will not respect them either." The chamber was silent. The council members looked at each other, measuring the weight of his words. Slowly, one by one, they nodded. They would stay. They would fight. They would die with their commander if that was their fate. The 3 days passed quickly. Human forces gathered at the border in numbers that had never been seen before. 500 warships, 2,000 support vessels, millions of soldiers ready to land on enemy planets. It was the largest military operation in human history. Admiral Sarah stood on the bridge of this vengeance as the final preparations were completed. Her fleet was arranged in combat formation, ready to jump into enemy space. In a few hours, the final battle would begin. She thought about her husband David, who had died on New Shanghai 4 years ago. She thought about the person she used to be before the war. She had been softer then, more hopeful. She had believed in things like peace and reconciliation. Now she believed only in victory and death. "All ships report ready, Admiral," Commander Park said. Sarah nodded. "Open a channel to the fleet." The communication system activated. Her voice would reach every ship, every soldier, every human being who had come to end the war. "This is Admiral," she said. "In a few minutes we will jump to the capital system. Many of us will not survive this battle. I will not pretend otherwise. But those who fall will die knowing that they helped end this war. They will die knowing that their sacrifice meant something." She paused and looked at the stars visible through the 4 years ago, the killed ambassador. They thought we were weak. They thought we would not fight. They were wrong. We have shown them what humanity becomes when we are pushed. We have shown them that we do not forgive. We do not forget. We do not give up. Her voice hardened. "Today we finish what they started. Today we take their capital. Today we end the empire, for Ambassador, for New Shanghai, for everyone we have lost. Let's go show them what happens when you kill one of ours." The fleet jumped. 500 ships vanished from human space and appeared in the heart of the empire. The final battle had begun. The defenders responded immediately. 300 warships moved to intercept the human fleet. Orbital platforms activated their weapons. Ground-based missiles launched toward the sky. The space around Prime filled with fire and death. Sarah watched the battle unfold on her tactical display. Human ships were dying, but they kept pushing forward. They did not waver or retreat. They drove straight into the heart of the enemy formation, accepting terrible losses to get close enough to strike. "Enemy flagship identified," Captain reported. "High Commander is aboard." "Target that ship," Sarah ordered. "All available firepower." This vengeance and her escorts turned toward the flagship. They pushed through the battle, destroying every enemy ship in their path. Sarah felt her ship shudder as enemy weapons struck the hull. Damage reports came in from all sections. She ignored them. Only one thing mattered now. On the flagship, High Commander watched the human warships approaching. They were coming for him specifically. He could see their intent in the way they moved. They wanted him dead, and they were willing to sacrifice everything to make it happen. "Helm evasive action," he ordered. "Get us away from their flagship." But there was nowhere to go. Human ships had surrounded his vessel. Their weapons were focused on him. He could feel the hull vibrating as enemy fire struck again and again. "Shields failing," his tactical officer reported. "Hull breaches on multiple decks." Closed his eyes. He thought about the day he killed Ambassador. He remembered her standing before him, unafraid, warning him that he was making a mistake. He had not believed her. He had thought he was strong and she was weak. He had been wrong. She had been stronger than he ever imagined. Her death had given birth to something terrible and unstoppable. Her death had created the army that was now destroying everything he had ever known. The human flagship fired its main weapon. A beam of concentrated energy pierced the flagship from bow to stern. The ship broke apart in a spectacular explosion. High Commander died instantly, along with his entire crew. The battle continued for 6 more hours. Without their commander, the defense began to crumble. Ships surrendered or fled. Orbital platforms were destroyed one by one. Ground forces braced for the inevitable invasion. Admiral Sarah watched the last enemy ships retreat and felt nothing. No joy, no satisfaction, just emptiness. The battle was won, but she had lost too much to celebrate. "Status report," she said quietly. "We've lost 212 ships," Commander Park replied. "Approximately 60,000 casualties, but the fleet is destroyed. The planet is defenseless." Sarah nodded. "Begin the landing operations. I want our flag flying over the capital by sunset." The invasion of Prime was swift and brutal. Human soldiers poured down from orbit in landing craft. They fought through the streets of the ancient city, clearing building after building. Soldiers resisted fiercely, but they were outnumbered and, by the end of the day, the capital was in human hands. The war was effectively over. The empire, which had stood for thousands of years, had fallen in less than a decade. They had made the mistake of killing a human diplomat, and humanity had responded with unrelenting war. In the ruins of the imperial palace, Admiral Sarah stood where High Commander had stood just days before. She looked out at the burning city and felt the weight of everything she had done. The victory was complete. The vengeance was achieved, but she was not sure what was left of her soul. Somewhere back on Earth in the Memorial Park, the statue stood unchanged. The words at its base still read, "You are wrong about us." Those words had proven true in ways no one could have imagined. The war was over, but its effects would echo through the galaxy for centuries to come. The war was won, but peace was something else entirely. 6 months had passed since the fall of Prime. The empire was shattered, its fleet destroyed, its capital occupied by human forces. But scattered across 18 star systems, millions of remained. Some had surrendered. Others continued to fight in small groups, refusing to accept defeat. Admiral Sarah stood before the United Earth Coalition Assembly. She was not used to politics. She was a warrior, trained to fight and destroy. But the politicians wanted her here, wanted her to explain what should happen next. They wanted her to tell them how to end what she had spent 5 years waging. President sat at the head of the assembly, looking even older than he had the last time Sarah had seen him. The war had aged everyone, but it had aged him most of all. He carried the weight of every decision on his shoulders. Admiral said, "The coalition has won the war. They are no longer a threat to human space, but we must now decide what to do with the defeated enemy. We turn to you for guidance." Sarah looked at the assembled representatives. She saw faces she recognized and many she did not. They all watched her with a mixture of respect and fear. She had become something legendary during the war. Some called her a hero, others called her a butcher. Perhaps she was both. "They committed a crime against humanity," she began. "They murdered our diplomat and her staff. They showed no mercy, so we showed none in return. We have achieved victory through blood and sacrifice. The question now is whether we continue until every is dead, or whether we find another path." A murmur ran through the assembly. Some representatives looked uncomfortable. Others nodded in agreement. "What do you recommend, Admiral?" asked. Sarah was quiet for a long moment. She thought about her husband David, killed on New Shanghai. She thought about the friends she had lost, the soldiers who had died under her command. She thought about the burning cities and the bodies floating in space and the screaming that still echoed in her dreams. "I recommend mercy," she said finally. The assembly went silent. This was not what they had expected from the woman who had destroyed the fleet without taking prisoners. This was not what they had expected from the warrior who had become the face of human vengeance. "Mercy?" someone asked. "After everything they did?" Sarah nodded. Not for their sake, for ours. We have spent 5 years becoming killers. We have transformed our entire civilization into a war machine. If we continue down this path, if we hunt down every last and destroy them completely, what will be left of us? What will we become? She looked at President. Ambassador believed in peace. She gave her life trying to build bridges between species. We honored her memory by fighting for justice. But I do not think she would want us to become monsters in her name. I think she would want us to find a way back to who we were. The debate that followed lasted for 3 days. Representatives argued passionately on both sides. Some wanted complete destruction of the species. They cited the crimes committed and the lives lost. They demanded blood for blood. Others supported Sarah's call for mercy. They warned that genocide would stain humanity's soul forever. They argued that there had to be another way. In the end, the assembly voted for a middle path. They would not be destroyed, but they would not be forgiven either. They would be contained in their remaining systems, forbidden from developing advanced weapons or building warships. Human forces would monitor them for generations. They would survive, but they would never again threaten anyone. It was not a perfect solution. Nothing could be perfect after so much death, but it was something. It was a chance for both species to heal. On the planet Titan, former Lieutenant James Wu watched the news coverage of the assembly debate from his hospital room. He had been discharged from medical care 2 months ago, but had nowhere else to go. He had been staying in a transitional facility for wounded veterans, trying to figure out what to do with the rest of his life. "They're really going to let them live," said Thomas Reed, another veteran who shared James's room. Thomas had lost his legs at the Battle of Seven. He was learning to use prosthetics but still spent most of his time in a wheelchair. "Seems like it," James replied. "You okay with that?" James thought about the question. He had killed so many over the past 5 years. He had watched friends die fighting them. He had hated them with a passion that had kept him alive through battles that should have killed him. "I don't know," he admitted. "Part of me wants them all dead. Part of me is just tired of killing." Thomas nodded slowly. "Yeah, I get that." They sat in silence for a while, watching the politicians argue on the screen. It all seemed very far away, like something happening in a different universe. The men in the assembly chamber had never held a rifle. They had never smelled the blood of a dying friend. They had never looked into the black eyes of a soldier and pulled the trigger. "What are you going to do now?" Thomas asked. "Don't know," James said. "Maybe go back to Mars, see my parents, try to remember how to be normal." "Normal," Thomas repeated. "Is there such a thing anymore?" "Probably not, but I'm going to try anyway." Far away, on the occupied planet of Prime, something unexpected was happening. A civilian named had approached the human military governor with a request. She wanted permission to build a memorial for Ambassador. The military governor was a woman named General. She had fought in the war from the beginning and had lost 2 sons in the fighting. She had every reason to hate but's request surprised her. "Why would you want to build a memorial for a human?" asked. Stood before her with her 4 arms folded in a gesture of respect. She was young by standards, perhaps equivalent to a human in their 30s. Unlike the soldiers had fought, there was no coldness in her black eyes. There was something that looked almost like shame. "Because she was murdered by my people," said, "and because her death brought destruction upon us, I do not expect forgiveness. I do not ask for it, but I think it is right to acknowledge what was done. I think it is right to remember her." Studied the woman for a long moment. She had learned to read their expressions over the years of fighting. She saw no deception in his face, only sincerity and a strange kind of hope. "Tell me about yourself," said. "What did you do before the war?" "I was a teacher," replied. "I taught history to young ones. I taught them about the glory of the empire, about our conquests and victories. I taught them that they were the superior species and that others existed to serve us." She lowered her head. "I was wrong. The war taught me that. Watching my people die, watching our cities burn, watching everything I believed in turn to ash. I was wrong about everything. And now I want to be different. I want my people to be different. I know that will take time. I know you do not trust us. But someone must take the first step. Someone must reach out across the darkness between our species. I thought perhaps a memorial might be that step. Thought about her sons. She thought about all the humans who had died. She thought about the hatred that still burned in her heart whenever she looked at a face. Then she thought about Ambassador. She had read everything written about the Diplomat. She knew that had spent her life building bridges between enemies. She knew that had believed in the possibility of peace even as she was being murdered. "Build your memorial," said finally. "I will not stop you." Looked up with surprise in her black eyes. "Thank you, General. I did not expect." "Don't thank me," interrupted. "I'm not doing this for you. I'm doing it because I think Ambassador would have wanted it. She believed in your species, even when you gave her no reason to. Maybe she saw something in you that we missed. Maybe she was just foolish. Either way, she deserves to be remembered." The memorial was built in the center of the ruined capital city. It was a simple structure, just a stone platform with a statue on top. The statue showed Ambassador with her hand raised in peace, just like the one on Earth. But this statue was made by hands using materials. It was a small thing, but it meant something. Organized a ceremony when the memorial was complete. She invited both civilians and human soldiers to attend. Most did not come. The wounds were still too fresh, the hatred still too strong. But a few showed up. A few were willing to stand together in silence and remember. General attended. She stood at the back of the small crowd and watched as spoke about the Diplomat she had never met, talked about courage and sacrifice and the possibility of redemption. She talked about the future and the hope that things might be different someday. Did not believe most of it. She had seen too much to believe in easy hope, but she was glad the memorial existed. She was glad someone was trying. On Earth, President was preparing to give the speech of his life. The war was officially over. A peace treaty had been signed. Human forces would begin withdrawing from territory within the year. After 5 years of constant conflict, it was finally ending. He stood before a crowd of millions in the plaza where statue stood. Cameras broadcast his image to every human colony in the galaxy. This was the moment when he had to find the words to explain what they had done and where they were going. 5 years ago, he began, the Empire murdered Ambassador. They thought they could kill her without consequences. They thought we were too weak to fight back. They were wrong. The crowd was silent, listening. We fought a war that cost millions of lives. We sacrificed our peace, our prosperity, and our innocence. We became something we never wanted to be, but we survived. We won. And now we must find a way to go forward. He looked at the statue of Ambassador believed in peace. She gave her life trying to build connections between species. I do not know if she would have approved of what we did in her name. I do not know if she would have wanted this war. But I know that she would want us to find our way back to who we were. She would want us to remember how to build instead of destroy. He turned back to the crowd. The war is over, but the work of peace is just beginning. We must rebuild our economy and our military. We must heal our wounds, both physical and spiritual. We must teach our children about what happened without teaching them to hate. We must become the people Ambassador believed we could be. His voice grew stronger. This will not be easy. There are those who will never forgive there are those who will always want more revenge, but we cannot give in to that darkness. If we do, we lose ourselves. If we do, the win even in defeat. He paused. Ambassador stood before her killer and said, "You are wrong about us." She was right, they were wrong about us. We are not weak. We do not surrender. We do not forget our dead. But we are also more than warriors. We are builders and dreamers. We are capable of mercy as well as justice. That is what makes us human. The crowd began to applaud. It started slowly, then grew until it filled the entire plaza. People were crying and hugging each other. After 5 years of war, they finally had something to celebrate. In her apartment overlooking the plaza, Maria Santos watched the speech on her. She was the fighter pilot who had lost her legs at the Battle of Vega Station. She had spent the past 4 years training new pilots and helping with the war effort in whatever way she could. She looked at her prosthetic legs. They worked well now. She could walk and even run. But she still remembered what it felt like to fly. She still dreamed about it sometimes. The war was over. She should have felt happy. Instead, she just felt empty. She had given everything to the fight, and now the fight was done. What was she supposed to do with the rest of her life? Her communicator beeped. She checked the message and saw that it was from the military academy. They were asking if she would be interested in a permanent teaching position. They wanted her to help train the next generation of pilots, the ones who would hopefully never have to fight a war. Maria looked at the message for a long time. Then she looked out the window at the celebration in the plaza. People were dancing and singing. Children were waving flags. It was a scene of joy that she had not seen in 5 years. Maybe this was how she moved forward. Maybe teaching was the answer. She could pass on what she had learned without passing on the hatred. She could help build something new instead of destroying things. She accepted the position. The galaxy was changing. The war had ended, but its effects would last for generations. Humans would have to learn to exist in the same universe, even if they could never truly trust each other. It would be difficult. It would take time, but it was possible. And somewhere, in a memorial park on 2 different worlds, statues of stood with their hands raised in peace. She had died trying to bridge the gap between species. Her death had caused a terrible war, but in the end her dream might still come true. It was a beginning, nothing more, nothing less, just a chance for things to be different. That was all anyone could ask for. 20 years had passed since the end of the human war. The galaxy had changed in ways no one could have predicted. Old hatreds had faded, new generations had risen, and the scars of conflict had slowly begun to heal. But the memory of what happened remained, written in the stars and in the hearts of all who had lived through those terrible times. James Wu stood at the window of his office on Mars and looked out at the red desert. He was 43 years old now, a professor of history at the University of Olympus Mons. He had spent the past 15 years studying the war he had fought in, trying to understand it, trying to make sense of the violence that had consumed his youth. His students called him Professor Wu, but he still thought of himself as the young private who had crouched in trenches on alien worlds. The nightmares had faded over time, but they never completely disappeared. Sometimes he still woke up reaching for a weapon that was not there. Today was special. Today was the 20th anniversary of the armistice, the day the war officially ended. Universities across human space were holding commemorations. James had been asked to give a lecture to his students, to explain what the war had meant and why it still mattered. He turned from the window and faced his class. 30 young faces looked back at him. They had been born after the war ended. They knew it only from books and videos and the stories their parents told them. To them, it was history. To James, it was memory. 20 years ago today, he began, humanity and the Empire signed a peace treaty. The war that had killed millions of people finally came to an end. Most of you have grown up in a time of peace. You have never known what it is like to live in constant fear, to wonder if your planet will be attacked, to say goodbye to friends knowing you might never see them again. He paused. I was 19 when the war started. I had planned to be an engineer. Instead, I became a soldier. I spent 4 years fighting on planets whose names most people have forgotten. I killed people. I watched friends die. I did things that still haunt me today. The students were silent, listening intently. Why am I telling you this? Because history is not just facts and dates. History is lived experience. The war was not just a series of battles and treaties. It was the worst moment of my life and the lives of millions of others. When you study it, I want you to remember that. A student raised her hand. Professor, do you think the war was worth it? Do you think we did the right thing? James had been asked this question many times over the years. He still did not have a good answer. Ambassador was murdered, he said. The thought they could kill her without consequences. If we had done nothing, what message would that have sent? What would have stopped them from doing it again? He shook his head slowly. But the cost was terrible. Millions dead, worlds destroyed, a whole generation by violence. Was it worth it? I honestly don't know. Some days I think yes. Some days I think we should have found another way. The truth is probably somewhere in between. After the lecture, James returned to his office. On his desk was a photograph from his military days. It showed him and his squad standing in front of a captured bunker. Most of the people in the photo were dead now, killed in battles that followed. James was one of only 3 survivors. He looked at the young faces in the photograph. They had all been so sure of themselves back then, so certain they were doing the right thing, so convinced that their cause was just. Now, with the benefit of 20 years, James was not so sure about anything. His communicator beeped. There was a message from an old colleague, General, now retired. She was on Prime and wanted to share something with him. James opened the attached video. It showed a ceremony at the memorial had built 20 years ago. The memorial had grown over the years. What started as a single statue was now a park covering several acres. There were gardens and benches and walls inscribed with the names of the dead, both human and. In the video stood next to. Both of them had aged, but they stood together as something that looked almost like friends. A new statue was being unveiled. It showed a human and a standing side by side, their hands joined. This statue represents hope, said in the video. Hope that our species can move beyond hatred. Hope that the children of today will not make the mistakes of their parents. Hope that the galaxy can be better than it was. Spoke next. I spent years hatting the. I had good reasons. They killed my sons and millions of other humans, but hatred is a heavy burden. It weighs you down until you cannot move forward. 20 years ago, I decided to put that burden down. It was the hardest thing I ever did, but it was also the best. James watched the video 3 times. Tears streamed down his face, but he did not wipe them away. He let them fall. In the territories, things had changed more than anyone expected. The generation that had started the war was dying off. Younger had grown up under human supervision, exposed to human ideas and values. Many of them questioned the old beliefs about superiority. Many of them wanted something different. Had become a leader in this new movement. She had spent 20 years building bridges between species, starting with the memorial and expanding into education and cultural exchange programs. She had founded schools where young learned about other species as equals, not inferiors. Her work had not been easy. Many resented her. They called her a traitor and worse. There had been threats against her life and attempts to destroy what she had built, but she kept going, driven by a conviction that her people could change. Now she stood in her office in the rebuilt capital city and looked at a holographic display showing the latest demographic data. For the first time in history, more young people identified as reformers than traditionalists. The tide was finally turning. Her assistant, a young named II, named after the infamous commander who had started the war, entered the room. Despite his name, he was nothing like his grandfather. He had been raised on stories of human cruelty, but he had chosen to see past them. The human delegation has arrived, II said. They are ready for the ceremony. Nodded, let them in. The delegation was led by a woman named Sarah, the granddaughter of Admiral Sarah who had won the war. The younger Sarah was a diplomat, not a warrior. She had spent her career working to improve relations between species. It seemed fitting that she was here today. Ambassador said, bowing in the gesture of respect. Thank you for coming. Administrator, Sarah replied, returning the bow. It is an honor to be here. They walked together to the ceremony site. It was being held in the ruins of the old imperial palace, which had been converted into a museum of reconciliation. The building stood as a reminder of what they used to be and a symbol of what they were trying to become. The ceremony was the official signing of a new treaty. This treaty would end human military supervision of space. After 20 years of occupation, they would be allowed to govern themselves again. It was a sign of trust that had seemed impossible when the war ended. And Sarah stood side by side as the treaty was signed. Cameras broadcast the image across the galaxy. Two species that had tried to destroy each other were now taking a step toward genuine partnership. Ambassador would have been proud, Sarah said quietly. Nodded. I think about her often. She came to us wanting peace and we killed her. It was the greatest shame in our history. Building this future is the only way I know to make amends. On Earth, in the memorial park where statues stood, an old woman sat on a bench and watched the treaty signing on her portable. She was Maria Santos, the fighter pilot who had lost her legs in the war. She was 72 years old now, retired from teaching after 30 years. She had trained hundreds of pilots during her career. Many of them had gone on to serve in the peacekeeping forces that maintained order in the galaxy. Some had even worked alongside crews on joint missions. The universe Maria had helped create was very different from the one she had fought in. A young man sat down beside her. He was perhaps 20, with dark hair and earnest eyes. He looked at thee and then at Maria. Is it true you fought in the war? He asked. Maria smiled. A long time ago, I was a pilot. What was it like? She thought about the question. How could she explain it to someone who had never experienced it? How could she describe the fear and the anger and the terrible losses? It was necessary, she said finally, and it was awful. Both things can be true at the same time. The young man nodded slowly. My grandmother was killed in the war, New Shanghai. I'm sorry. She was a teacher. She had no connection to the military. She just happened to be on the wrong planet when they attacked. Maria had heard thousands of stories like this. Everyone had lost someone. Everyone carried grief. What do you think she would say about this? Maria asked, pointing to the treaty signing on the. The young man was quiet for a moment. I think she would say it was good. She believed in education. She believed people could learn to be better. I think so too. They sat together in silence, watching history being made. Across the galaxy, the treaty signing was celebrated. In human space, there were parties and speeches and remembrances for the dead. In space, there was cautious hope and quiet reflection. Two civilizations that had nearly destroyed each other were learning to exist side by side. It had taken 20 years, but they had arrived at something like peace. Not the easy peace that Ambassador had hoped to negotiate, but something deeper and harder. A peace forged in blood and paid for with millions of lives. A peace that both sides had earned through suffering. James Wu finished his classes for the day and went home to his apartment. His wife was waiting for him, a woman named who had been a nurse during the war. They had met at a veteran support group and had been together for 15 years. How was the anniversary lecture? Asked. Difficult, James admitted. It's always difficult. She took his hand. Come, I made dinner. They sat together and ate and talked about ordinary things. Their children, both in college now. The garden was planting. The new restaurant that had opened down the street. Normal life in a normal time. After dinner, James stepped outside and looked up at the stars. Somewhere out there, the treaty was being signed. Somewhere out there, humans were learning to trust each other. Somewhere out there, the galaxy was becoming something new. He thought about the young soldier he used to be. He thought about the friends he had lost and the enemies he had killed. He thought about the long road from war to peace and all the steps he had taken along the way. "We made it," he said quietly to the stars. "I don't know how, but we made it." In her memorial park, statue stood with its hand raised in peace. The words at the base had been changed 10 years ago. They no longer read, "You are wrong about us." Now they read something new, something that had suggested during a visit to Earth. Peace is not the absence of conflict. It is the presence of justice. It was a quote from Ambassador herself, taken from a speech she had given early in her career. She had believed in those words until the moment of her death, and in the end, those words had proven true. They had killed humanity's diplomat. Humanity had responded with unrelenting war, but war was not the end of the story. It was only the beginning. What came after, the long, slow work of building peace and healing wounds, was harder than any battle. Ambassador had understood that. She had known that true peace required more courage than war. She had given her life for that belief, and somehow, against all odds, her belief had been vindicated. The stars continued to shine as they always had, but now they shone on a galaxy that was learning to be better. It was not perfect. It would never be perfect, but it was enough. It was enough.